feeling that shows up in AI conversations all the time. And people don't usually say it directly, but if you listen carefully, it sounds something like this. I feel like everyone else got a memo that I didn't. Everyone else seems confident. Everyone else seems informed. Everyone else seems to know what matters, what's changing, what tools to use, and even what the future looks like.
Mhm.
And if we're honest, that feeling can be surprisingly persuasive. Because once you start believing that there was a memo, it's very easy for you to conclude that the problem is you. Welcome to episode 130 of Instant Expertise Marketing Plus AI. I'm Yvette Brown, co-founder of X Promos. I became an entrepreneur at 23 when I started a promotions agency with my then 29-year-old business partner, Shari Nomadi. Together, we've built campaigns for global brands, and today we're helping people build decision confidence through AI fluency by keeping humans accountable, technology understandable, and outcomes measurable.
Hi, and I'm Shari Nomadi. Yvette and I rarely think alike, which is what makes us great business partners. But we've both noticed the same pattern over the last couple of years. Very smart people, very accomplished people, very capable people, quietly assuming everyone else understands more than they do. Imagine that. And what's fascinating is that many of the people they're comparing themselves to are carrying that exact same assumption.
Yeah, and really that's what makes it so interesting because the feeling really isn't about information, it's all about perception. And as you know, Shari, as our client once told us a cajillion years ago, perception is reality, right?
Amen.
So when confidence becomes highly visible, uncertainty becomes invisible. Like you don't see it at all. So we start comparing our private uncertainty to everyone else's public certainty. And that is really not a fair comparison on any level.
Oh, Yvette, absolutely. It's not even close
Yeah.
because most people don't broadcast their confusion, right? It's like the
Right.
highlights on social media. You only see the good stuff. They broadcast their conclusions. You see the keynote. You see the LinkedIn post, you see the article, you see the prediction. But what you do not see is the hesitation, the questioning, the uncertainty, the conversations behind the scenes. You only see the finished version.
And the problem is that AI amplifies that dynamic because the environment moves so quickly. There are new tools, new announcements, new capabilities, new predictions, which creates a constant pressure to have an opinion, to sound informed, to appear current, to always have a hot take, right? You got to have a hot take.
Yep.
And eventually, people start confusing that confidence with clarity.
And that is such an important distinction because confidence is visible and clarity is really a lot harder to see. Confidence can be performed, clarity is something that usually just can't. And one of the things we've noticed repeatedly is that the people who sound most certain are not always the people with the strongest judgment. Sometimes they're simply the people most comfortable projecting certainty.
Shari, I kind of love that. It's like total Dunning-Kruger effect. The people with the least knowledge or competence are the ones who greatly overestimate their own capabilities.
Mhm.
So one of the other patterns that I've noticed is that people have started stopping trusting their own read of a situation, right?
Mhm.
So instead of trusting your gut, they're actually reading everyone else. They're kind of scanning, saying, well, maybe you've done this, or you're in a meeting and someone mentions AI. And before you've even processed what's been discussed, you're looking around the room. who's looking worried, right? Who's looking
Hmm.
excited? Who's confident? You're looking for clues about how you should feel. And that's really
Yeah.
not because you're incapable. You've been very capable your whole career, but that uncertainty is what makes us social.
And that's really a great observation, Yvette, because when people feel oriented, they evaluate information. When they feel disoriented, they evaluate reactions. And those are really two very different things.
Wow. I actually think that that one is worth repeating. When people feel oriented, they evaluate information. But when they feel disoriented, they evaluate reactions.
Hmm.
Because you know what? We see that a lot. And another place that this shows up is in the disclaimers that people give, right? Like you've heard that. We hear it all the time. Before they're even asked a question, they say, "Oh, I'm not very technical," or "I should probably know this," or "I'm behind on all of this." Right? We hear that in our training sessions all the time. And yet, nobody asked a question, right? This
Right.
disclaimer comes from them before we've even had the conversation. And it
Hmm.
almost feels like they're lowering expectations before anyone else even has a chance to judge them.
Absolutely. And eventually what you start to realize the disclaimer was never really about technology.
Yeah.
It was just protection. It was a way of shielding yourself from the possibility that everyone else knows something that you don't know.
Yep. Shielding yourself from the possibility, not even the
Mhm.
probability.
Right.
And so, what ends up happening with folks is, this is the next thing that happens along the way. You try a tool, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, or maybe it kind of works, which seems like more likely what typically happens. But instead of asking the question, was this the wrong tool? Or was this the wrong use case? Or even, was this actually solving the right problem? People will instead turn that result inward and they say, what am I missing? What did I do wrong?
And this one is huge because once you believe everyone else got the memo, every imperfect result becomes evidence. Evidence that they're ahead, evidence that you're behind, evidence that you've missed something really important.
And honestly, I think that's where a lot of professionals are getting stuck. They assume that AI fluency is something that other people possess, something they haven't earned yet, something that they're supposed to
Mhm.
acquire through these skills before they can even participate confidently. But they're not asking the question, what if this is the wrong model entirely? What if AI fluency isn't something you receive, but it's something you build?
And what if the first step isn't learning more? What if the first step is realizing there was never a memo? I mean, honestly, let's think about this. Who exactly would have written the memo? The technology is evolving, the market is evolving, organizations are still experimenting. Some of them haven't even dipped their toes in yet. Even experts disagree with each other constantly. So, where is this mythical certainty that people are waiting for?
My God, it's such a good question. Who even wrote the memo? Because the thing is, when people imagine a memo, they're imagining an authority, right?
Mhm.
Like someone who knows, someone who can tell them what matters, what doesn't, what to focus on, what to ignore. But the reality is actually much messier, and really, it's much more human. The
Mhm.
people who seem most grounded, they are not the ones operating from certainty. They're the ones that are operating from evaluation.
And that's really the shift. It's evaluation, not certainty. They don't necessarily know what's going to happen. They've simply become better at asking, does this matter? If so, for whom? Under what circumstances? What evidence supports this? What's driving this narrative? Because those questions create stability.
Yep, and stability feels different than certainty. The thing is, certainty is rigid, whereas stability is adaptive. Certainty says, I know. Stability says, I know how I'm going to evaluate this. And that is a very different kind of confidence.
And that's where real AI fluency starts, not with the answers, but with trust. Trust in your ability to assess what you're seeing, trust in your ability to ask good questions, and trust in your ability to know when to slow down before reacting.
Yeah, and there's another realization that starts to show up when people stop chasing the memo. They begin noticing that the most valuable people in the room aren't necessarily the people with the most AI knowledge. They're
Mhm.
often the people with the strongest judgment. They're the ones with the
Yep.
strongest context, the strongest understanding of, say, the customer base, or maybe operations, or risk, or even strategy, or, yeah, all of those things. Any combination thereof, depending on your role.
Absolutely. And that's such an important distinction because AI can generate possibilities, but it cannot tell you which possibility matters most in your situation. And that is still a human decision.
Yep, AI is great at generating possibilities. The thing is, when you have a marketer look at something, they understand their audience.
Mhm.
When you have an output that's, financially related, a CFO, they're going to understand financial risk. You've got a doctor, they're going to understand patient context and what else is going on. Whereas a lawyer, they're going to understand nuance in a situation and the legal angle around that. And even a leader, they're going to understand sort of the organizational realities, the change management, all that part of it. In all of those situations, AI can absolutely contribute, but their judgment is where the value gets created.
And that's one reason the memo is so misleading because it implies that the goal is acquiring more information, when in reality, the goal is learning how to combine with new capabilities with existing expertise.
Yep, that is a huge difference, and that's really what it comes down to, is that new capabilities, existing expertise, how they work together. Because many professionals today are quietly questioning whether their experience still matters. And that's really hard for us because we see it every day that almost the opposite is what's actually true. The people getting the most value from AI are the people who bring deep experience into the conversation and are focused on outputs based on that expertise. They don't know more prompts, but they do know what a good answer looks like and what isn't.
And one of the things that AI has done is make it easier for almost everyone to sound knowledgeable about everything. But sounding knowledgeable and exercising judgment are not the same thing. AI can generate options, but it cannot replace discernment and it cannot replace context. It cannot replace experience, which is what you bring to the equation. It cannot replace the ability to recognize when something is technically correct, but strategically wrong.
That's so very true. And that's really the part that so many people are getting wrong. They're treating expertise as the thing that AI is replacing, when expertise is actually becoming more important because someone still has to evaluate the output. Someone
Mhm.
still has to ask, is this true? Is it useful? Is it complete? Is it appropriate? Should we act on this?
And as you can see, those questions are not technical. Those questions are all based on judgment and experience.
Yeah, exactly. And eventually something changes, right? You stop scanning the room trying to figure out how worried you should be. You stop measuring yourself against every other confident voice. You stop assuming everyone else knows something you don't, and instead, you begin evaluating for yourself. Not perfectly, not instantly, but increasingly.
And maybe one of the most important shifts is this: you start suspecting there was never a memo, because we never figured out who wrote it anyway. There were opinions, there were predictions, headlines, marketing, there was confidence, there was performance, but there was never a memo. No memo.
Yeah, and
No memo.
and once you stop looking for that memo, something else becomes possible. You start paying attention to your own judgment. You once again start trusting your own evaluation. You start recognizing that AI fluency isn't about having all the answers. It's about knowing how to think when nobody does. A lot of our recent work has been exploring this idea and what happens when people stop outsourcing judgment and start building and leveraging it instead. And, we're building something much larger around that idea right now. We'll be talking to you about it soon. And we appreciate you coming today. And thanks for listening.